Hello everybody, and today I want to give you a little history lesson. If you are familiar with my channel, you know that I made a TikTok video or YouTube short about indigenous cultures that practice anarchist communism or broadly anarchism in general. They live in an anarchist society. Right now, only 300,000 indigenous people of hunter-gatherer societies practice anarchism, and over millions, about millions of people. For example, the geographic location of Sumeria, which is in Asia, which is the size of Europe, this geographical location with a population of 100 million people. It's been an anarchist society for around 2,000 years, making it the oldest civilization in the world, even though it's not centralized. It's anarchist. It's decentralized, horizontal. But I want to talk about something interesting. When people think about civilization, they usually talk about cities, urbanized cities, started in the Bronze Age, usually with Mesopotamia, with the Uruk period at the beginning of this Bronze Age. But what if I told you the earliest known cities were anarchist societies? And today I will give you a couple examples throughout this society that have practiced these things. But we have to go before the Bronze Age because the first city predate Mesopotamia by 5,000 years, right? For example, we can see a sample like the Quinnipiac, which means the long waterland, refers to one part of the land of Quiripi belonging to the Algonquian-speaking indigenous people who variously called themselves the Quinnipiac or the Quiripi and Renapi. They live in Connecticut and eastern parts of New York and Long Island. When English settlers arrived in 1638, they document Quinnipiac residency. There are now the Connecticut towns of New Haven, North Haven, Guilford, and Brantford. Archaeologists have found human artifacts that date back to 6000 BC. Dina Dinkosker takes who is the archaeologist, dates the rise of the schemes in Quinnipiac society to the woodland period of 1000 to 1500 CE, the same time as the adoption of the maize agriculture. In their culture, nuclear family traditionally live in wigwam, typically about 8 feet high and 16 feet long. Sometimes the family shared the house and other relatives. Women did most of the farming, child raising, and meal preparation. Divorce was easy, and women commonly left abusive husbands. From a young age, children were encouraged to be independent and to assist elderly. Men did most of the hunting and fishing. But in the consensus democracy and direct democracy was common in these anarchist society. There's a great video called Dan Anarchism who made a video about consensus democracy in indigenous cultures. In the 2007 essay by the Quinnipiac Grand Scheman Ayer Thunderhorse, the nation's traditional government consists of a local sekemdom who federate under a Grand Sekem and belong to a very large federation of other Algonquian and Iroquoian speaking people. The Grand Sekem, according to the Thunderhorse, was responsible for conducting diplomatic relations, welcoming runners, new carriers, merchants, etc. The Grand Sekem collected tribute from a local Sekem's village. At the village level, a longhouse chief or sekem led to a council of stumps, chiefs, or sagamore. The longhouse chief inherited his or her position, while the stump chiefs did not. The stump chiefs were elderly and well-respected community members. According to Thunderhorse, their duties include operating the outlying summer fishing camps, wampum peas, processing, collecting and drying foods, harvesting cultures, the commodities, etc. It was not uncommon for schism in New England to be women. Anthropologist John Menta observes citing the female Quinnipiac schemes, Sakkams, Shampishu, and Shampiskia. By some accounts, the Sakkam and their council had little or no coercive authority over their villages. Anthropologist Robert Grumman claims that the Sakkam's power depend on the power of persuasion rather than persuasion of power. If the people did not agree with their Sakkam, they will either disobey or leave to join another Sakkadom. By necessity, then Sakkams appear to have followed the express consensus on the land for all important decisions. Men then elaborate, important decisions were made by the Sakkams and his or her council based on general consensus on the ban. Families, factions, or individuals who disagree with the consensus were free to relocate and join another native community. On minor decisions, the Skesa usually went along with the view of the council. Once in 1645, Quinipa's dogs killed some pigs belonging to English settlers, and the settlers convinced the Momauguin to order all of his band of dogs to be killed. The vast majority of the band's dog order refused to kill their dogs, and Momauguin explained in the New Harvest Town Tom Marshall that he had not pressed the issue since he feared other tribes members might poison him. There is no consensus over the degree of government in the Quinnipiac traditionally have. By Menta's account, the Quinnipiac lack a strong centralized form of government. However, a study of the southern New England Indians by Catherine Bracken described a more hierarchical society as a typical by the region, with seconds getting wealthy by taxing subjects and class of people born into permanent slavery. Brando's analysis, while not especially about the Quinipa, may call into question aspects of Menta's account of relative society. Thunderhorse communicated with both Menta and Brandon and has commented favorably on the work of both scholars. The current constitution of the Aquanian Confederacy of the Quinnipiac Tribal Council described the grand schema as a nation's ultimate sovereignty. In the economy, according to Roger Williams, the Indians of New England community owned land and did not have individually owned private property. William wrote the natives were very exact punctual in the bounds of their land belonging to this or that prince or people. Each village appeared to have a gift economy, and even trade between villages were articulate in the language of gift-giving, aka Proto-Dynasty and anarcho-communism of the conquest of bread. There you go. The Quinnipiac farmer hunted and fished for food starting in 1622. They traded wombats, bees made from clamshell, and the Dutch then other settlers in exchange for fur. In their neighboring societies, the Thunderhurst write the Quinnipiac National traditional affiliate with the Wapinko Confederacy, which belongs to an even broader Dawnland Confederacy that include Algonquian and Iroquoian-speaking people on northeastern woodlands who met once a year at a grand central fire. Wombat belts known as the Covenant Chain Belts, and a string of wombats were carried by the Iroquoian pine tree sheep, Algonquian longhouse chiefs, and stump chiefs, who, with the wise shamans, met at these large assemblies. By contrast, Menta described the Wampanoag Confederacy as a myth and contends that the Quinnipiacs were not members of a confederacy or effective military alliance. On 24 November 1638, the English settlers signed the Momauguini Treaty with the Quinnipiacs sketching Momauguin. Allegedly, this treaty ceded almost all Quinnipiac lands to the English in return for military protection from other Indians. According to John Meta, that the Quinnipiac second perceived the terms of the treaty in the same light as the English did is doubtful. Though the colonists word the treaty as essentially a deal of purchase to the territory, the Indians interpreted more as an agreement for joint occupation of the land. The quickly referred English settler long campaign of dispossession and conversion Indian as a trail of heartaches. This is one example of many in before and during the Bronze Age we have anarchist societies, especially earliest known cities were anarchist cities. And we should not forget this. People often think that hierarchy is basically nature, while in reality this is not the case in both archaeology and anthropology. You know? We have to be very careful when people make those types of claims, especially people who are not experts. Right? Another example we can see is early Israel society. While it is true at the very least in the urban areas, patriarchy was the norm and there was a hierarchical society as far back. Even the Old Testament had promoted some form of hierarchy in one shape or form. But if we see in the early Israel society, especially from a more agricultural and away from urban settlements, rebelling against bureaucratic city-states, the early Israelites established a tribal pastoral society that, while extremely patriarchal and theologically repressive, resisted statehood for about 300 years until they established a monarchy in the 10th century BCE. For these early Israelites had no temple, no city, no king, according to the theologian Laurent Dixta. A monument erected by Pharaoh Merneptah reports that Israel emerged as a distinct nation by 1220 BCE. Although the Old Testament described an exodus of Israelite slaves from Egypt into Canaan, archaeological findings contradict biblical accounts. Cities said to be destroyed by the Israelites were actually destroyed long before the Israelites are said to have arrived in Canaan. There is no evidence that Israelites were in Egypt or the masses of slaves left Egypt. Some scholars say therefore the Israelites were actually dissident Canaanite farmers and herders who were sick obeying and paying tribute to city-state rulers. Norman Kutwal, a sociologist and biblical scholar, argues that the Israelites were indigenous Canaanites who rebelled against their rulers and creditors. And I quote from the man, "All the evidence for the early Israel points to its tribalism and self-construct instrument of resistance and of decentralized self-rule. Early Israelites had no taxes, no rent, and no interest. People had approximately equal access to basic resources. Israel had no specialized political offices. Political structures include extended families and their protected associations called Mishpat, a citizen army, the ritual congregation, the landless Levite priests, and the Recepio Method specialists." As Peter Gordelux emphasized the decentralization of ancient Israelites, and I quote, "Contrary to the exaggeration of the Bible, the United Kingdom of Israel was not a state at the level of unification. It achieved was minimal, limited to battlefield and a few acts of temple construction, the most famous being Jerusalem, a city that at the time only had a few hundred inhabitants. Perhaps only the last of the three supposed kings, Saul, David, and Solomon, actually exercised a leadership role over the whole of the confederation. Significantly, the conquest story of the origins of Israel was made up a couple centuries later by state historians who wanted to invent a militarist pedigree, which the country was founded on the slaughters of heathens. Archaeological evidence showed that in reality the Israelites and the Canaanites peacefully coexisted. The Northern Tribal Confederacy of Israel, which contained the majority of Israeli tribes, rejected Solomon's attempt to found a dynasty, so that as his son only had authority in a smaller southern kingdom of Judah. The politogenesis actually occurred over the following century, as the kingdom of Judah and the kingdom of Israel fought each other and also waged war against the Moabites, the Assyrians, the Egyptians, and the Neo-Babylonians. The Old Testament reflects the kingdom of Judah disdain for Israel's tolerance of polytheism, and document Judah's use of monotheism to legitimate the role of a supreme monarch supported by a priestly class. The kingdom of Israel promoted polytheism, particularly the worship of Phoenician god Baal, partly as a way to prevent their religious cultural domination by Jerusalem, the capital of Judah, and partly as a reflection of their greater tolerance or weaker control by priestly class. Though the northern kingdom was more populous and architecturally more advanced, it can be argued that they did not develop into a state until later under the Umayyad dynasty. David Graeber also noted that, and I quote, "Resistance in the ancient Middle East was always less politics of rebellion than a politics of exodus, of melting away when one's flock and family, often before both were taken away." Graeber later added, "The words of holy books, the Old and New Testament, the Quran, religious literature from Middle Asia to this day echo this voice of rebellion, combining contempt for corrupt urban life, suspicion of the merchant, and often intense misogyny." Despite the pervasiveness of misogyny in the Hebrew Bible, women may have been religious authorities in ancient Israel. Archaeologists found that ancient Israel burned cannabis during worship, which, to be honest, that kind of explains a lot many of the strange parts of the Old Testament. By the time of the monarchy, if not earlier, the Israelite theology replaced animistic tribalism with a belief in an anthropomorphic God to a transcendent nature. Murray Bookchin argued that their fear of God provided ideology of unreasonable obedience of ruled by fiat and the powers of supernatural retribution. And in fact, they actually have four genders in this ancient Israel until misogyny and sexism and anti-LGBT sentiments that isn't procreate that were started to develop when monotheism became on the rise. Sadly, that's how it goes. Another sample of these before or during the early Bronze Age, another anarchist civilization is the Cucuteni Tribalian civilization. This is from 4800 to 3000 BCE, what is now known as Moldova, Romania, and Ukraine. It had a population of more than 1 million people. It appears to have highly egalitarian, peaceful, and ecological sustainable. A common pattern is for equally sized houses to be arranged in the concentrated circles around an open area that might have been used for popular assemblies and ceremonies. Although houses are the same size and look the same on the outside, the inside had extremely very decorated, suggested individual and playfulness. Moreover, the neighbors, while sharing circular arrangement, had different enough arrangement that archaeologists believe the planning must have been from a bottom up. The largest site is Daljanki, which is 1,000 houses and covers 300 hectares. The Romanian sites are called Cucuteni, and the sites in the former Soviet Union called Tripilia. However, they form a unified culture. And the culture in question has household poetry and figurines frequently portray woman's body. Gimbutas see the culture as part of a gender egalitarian goddess worship of the Europe, or the Proto-Indo-European beliefs at the time. The circular arrangement of the house put no one at the head and which leaves space in the middle for communal activities. And Chris Knight likened it to a contemporary and relative egalitarian village of Canal villagers in Brazil who also arranged their houses in circle before leaving a village or city. Tripilians would burn their houses. The Ukrainian version of these designs a study that is based design on it, she said by Sivalta Verba, the most precious part of the previous Sumerian culture is cherishing the woman and the symbolism of the woman like a goddess, like a symbol of fertile land, like a symbol of birth. They cherish it a lot. The economy combines small-scale farming and foraging, producing a variety diet including wheat, barley, and pulses, apples, pears, cherries, sloes, acorns, etc., and meat from wild deer and boar, and domesticated cattle. As David Graeber said in The Dawn of Everything, as well as managing orchards, gardens, livestock, and woodlands, the inhabitants of these cities imported salt in bulk from spring and the Eastern Carpathians and the Black Sea littoral. Flint extraction by ton takes place. The Dine Street Valley, furnishing material for tools, and houses poly-industrial flourish. It produced considerable amount of fine ceramic and prehistoric wool and regularly supplied copper flour from the Balkans. But we also have an ecological environmental aspect to society. It was surprisingly light. To speculate that residents consciously manage their ecosystem to avoid large-scale deforestation. According to Vesta, there is a lot of things that we have to learn from ancient people or Tripilian people. Their attitude to life and nature because they understood they depend on nature. We also see early Neolithic Salt de Levant that has a pre-Proto-Neolithic period from 10,500 BC to 600 BC. There appears to be an absence of gender hierarchy and class stratification. Great goods are rare, and when passed do not signify different rituals treatment on men's or women's bodies. Skeletal remains suggest that men and women have similar amount of work and similar level of overall health. Figurines mostly portray women consistent with other non-Neolithic egalitarian societies. As James Peterson writes in the Near Eastern Archeology, altogether, the multiple lines of data here do not offer evidence of gender hierarchy among pre-Proto-Neolithic societies in southern Levant. Men and women jointly participate in the physical demanding activity. There is no evidence indicating to one sex dominating or controlling production. Neither there is evidence of increased spatial segregation of the sexes in either domesticated or mortuary contexts. Examinations of grave goods and mortuary treatment indicate that the men and women share access to ritual realms crucial to status and prestige. And we also had like the Çayönü, which is an archaeological finding in the Anatolia city, containing evidence of social revolution in the year 7200 BCE that installed egalitarian anarchist communist society lasting to 3,000 years. The lower layers of the building construct demonstrate a shift from hunting and gathering to patriarchal class society. Temples contain blood and cross daggers from human sacrifice, and one temple contains 700 skeletons stacked to a ceiling. The skulls were kept alongside the remains of hunted animals. David Graeber to see the culture showing a development of cultural connection between hunting and social domination. But then, in 7200 BCE, there appears to be a core social revolution. According to Bernhard Brosius, temples and large manors were burned down and replaced with houses that were just as large but were roughly the same size. Slums and inferior shacks disappeared. Brosius summarized, not only did revolutionary of those remote times succeed in overthrowing a regime thousands of years old, bloody and exploited, moreover, they also succeed developing their own alternative society, devising and realizing it. The social revolution in the year 7200 BC is the hour of the birth of the Neolithic communism, an egalitarian class society, a rise in which women and men are equal, a society will rapidly spread over the whole of Anatolia, almost simultaneously over the Balkans, and which endured for 3,000 years. One of the Brosius sources is the paper by the Turkish archaeologist Mehmet Özdogan, which described that class across Neolithic Anatolia and Southeast Europe. Some sort of social turbulence was followed by a much more egalitarian rural economy than the centralized system of Syro-Mesopotamia. Özdogan reported that especially built temples or court buildings are totally absent in Anatolia and southern European Neolithic culture, that there is no indication of either any environmental deterioration or deforestation. We also see another example in China of the Pelican culture. In the Henan province, there is about 100 known sites from the ancient Pelican culture around 7000 to 5000 BC. There are arrangements suggesting political decentralization, and Pelican culture was in general an egalitarian society. According to Li Lui, the people of the Pelican culture farmed millet and rice and domesticated pigs, dogs, and possibly chickens. And the Jinwao and the Shuquan side, the differences in grade schools were not large enough to indicate long-term economic privileges. There are more prestigious grades were not specially separate from other grades. There is no clear pattern of man getting more grade goods than women or vice versa. Most grade goods were not gender specific. In contrast, the burials in the stratified Donnekon and Longshan culture where most grade foods were gender specific. Houses were occupied in clusters, probably based in kinship. Since burials occur right next to houses, it is likely that ancestors play an important role in everyday life. We also had the Late Taoisi, was a highly stratified state in ancient China that was brought down around 2000 BCE, but what the excavator he knew caused a state of anarchy. Rebels raised the city walls, built houses in the elite's former neighborhoods, and buried their dead in the elites of former cemeteries. David Graeber attributed this change as the world's first documented social revolution, or at least the first in an urban setting. For 2 to 3 subsequent centuries, the society lasted as a stable and apparent egalitarian polity, and even grew in size to 280 to 300 hectares. We also have the Çatalhöyük, which was a city in Anatolia, existed from 7500 to 5700 BCE, with an estimated 10,000 people. One of the earliest known cities, Çatalhöyük is notable for gender equality, economic equality, and absence of a state, an absence of war, and an apparent ecological orientation. Ian Halter, a Stanford archaeologist who has led the excavation site since the 1990s, explains, people live with the principles of equality in Çatalhöyük, especially consider the hierarchy that appears in other settlements in the Middle East. This makes Çatalhöyük different. There was no leader, government, or administrative building. Men and women were equal. This civilization was part of a broader, close culture, which, according to Marija Gimbutas, had an absence of understanding central building which could suggest a hierarchy. Citing the archaeologist James Melton's work, and Murai Bookchin writes, "It toolkit and highly naturalistic artistry suggests an ecological orient community of late Paleolithic hunters and gatherers rather than an early Neolithic community of food cultivation. The culture is marked by a very sophisticated stone and bone ethics, by markedly collected 12 adorned with images of animals and shaman-like figures, with a mid-painting of reindeer, leopards, and bow-carrying hunter. Nor do hierarchy and warfare seem to be features of the city's social life. Judging from the size of Catal's dwellings and the implements found in burial remains, the city was very egalitarian despite minor differences that are observable. There are no obvious signs of violence or deliberate signs of destruction. Melart observed for the original city and its nearby successor, but which are simply abandoned for no apparent reason after centuries of occupation. Cases of violent death among the hundreds of scattered examined the site are notable for their absence. The residents domesticated cattle until 8000 BCE, even though the region's neighboring society began 1500 years earlier. It therefore seemed that the society rejection of cattle domestication was a conscious choice. David Graeber persists they reject cattle domestication in order to preserve man's prestige for hunting wild cattle. Another reason might be they wish to preserve gender egalitarianism. As the anthropologist Lionel Smith writes, the shift from foraging to pastoralism generally meant that men no longer needed to continuously pay bride services by hunting and could for the first time purchase a wife with a single payment of cattle. The Pride family, who once always stood in solidarity with her, now had an interest in destroying her to keep the cattle. Indeed, the eventual transition from hunting to cattle hardly appears to have coincided with a decline in egalitarianism and with environmental problems caused by deforestation and overgrazing. In the Discover magazine, Jennifer Hattam writes, ongoing research may link to the arrival of domesticated cattle would emerge inequality between households and increasing individualistic behavior among the residents. In the culture, with no elite class or gender hierarchy, the whole population appears lives full of feasts, music, dance, and moral painting, housed to wall with no space between them, forming the honeycomb structure. Most people move between houses by walking across rooftops, while people live in nearby identical houses and were buried with roughly the same quality and quantity of goods. The wild diversity of these goods suggests to Bernhard Brosius that the society respected people's individuality. The religion appeared to be non-hierarchical and based on goddess-centered cosmology. Of anyone excavated sculptures of deities, 33 were of goddesses, only 8 depicted masculine gods. Although there were priestesses, there was no evidence of hierarchical organization. They were distributed among regular houses, suggesting religion with everyday life. Women and men were equal, which is a common theme in this anarchist society before and during the Bronze Age. As Holder explained, thanks to modern scientific technique, we have seen that women and men were eating very similar foods, live similar lives, and work in similar work. Which is very important to understand. Same social structure as given to both men and women, we learned that men and women were equally approachable. Older houses had somewhat greater density of prestigious objects such as hunting trophies and a volcanic glass called obsidian. This suggested Graeber that elders and perhaps elder women in particular held positions of influence, but more prestigious households are distributed among less and do not coalesce into elite neighborhood. Society seemed to have been very peaceful, with no signs of violent deaths among the many hundreds of skeletons excavated. Paintings do not show evidence of war or crime. You also seen that the feasts and festivals were frequent. Almost half of the adult skeletons show signs of alteration that may have resulted from frequent dancing. In the economy, it was equally can be deduced from the fact that dwellings were all roughly the same size and burial goods were roughly the same quantity and quality. There is no evidence that the society had an internal market economy. Residents practiced flood retreat farming, which required minimal labor or central management and no deforestation. Researchers estimate that less than half of the people's labor time focused on meeting people's basic needs, and the other half focused on cultural production such as organizing feasts, dance, ritual, education, the painting of murals. The average life expectancy was 32 years, surpassing that of the exploitation population of subsequent millennia until around 1750. In the environment, paintings of animals may have suggested a reference for non-human life. The combination of small farming, hunting, and gathering fed the society that lasted for about 2 millennia. And when it comes to crime, there were people buried with goods. There is no evidence of grave robbery, and the paintings do not depict fighting or crime. In their neighboring societies, was non-patriarchal Neolithic communists that lasted for 3,000 years, spreading to all of Anatolia. There is evidence of social revolution in the Eastern Kanur in the year 1700 BCE. They will overthrow a violent class society and install a apparently egalitarian society more similar to Çatalhöyük. However, buildings of this society remain unexceptionally well preserved compared to neighboring cities and towns. We also can see this in the in the Ionic Crete was a large and peaceful and probably stateless, non-patriarchal Bronze-Age Mediterranean society that flourished around 3000 to 1100 BCE. This is the earliest example of civilization in Greece. Due to the predominance of female goddesses and the scarcity of male gods, a number of scholars have suggested Ionic Crete had a matriarchal culture, as at the book Matriarchal Studies. Mainstream scholars have been conscious about such characteristics. For example, in the culture, the archaeologist Arthur Evans found there were few, if any, male gods, and the female divinity named Rhea had the highest status in the religious pantheon. In their artwork, most frequently portray women in position of power. The philosopher Heide Cotten at Petrov considered Crete to be a matriarchal society, as a true gender equality religion. Peter Gaudelut wrote that the Cretans were, if not matriarchal, non-patriarchal, with almost exclusively female deities and female or trans priestesses. David Graeber dismissed the mainstream scholarly resistance to accept the existence of egalitarianism or matriarchy in Greece, responding to the complaints about absence of ethnographic data. Graeber noted that the scholar had been able to understand the Athenian polis without ethnographic materials. Scholars said female-oriented religion and art do not by themselves imply gender equality or matriarchy in actual relations. However, Graeber points out no one has ever managed to produce an example of patriarchal society which artistic representation focused nearly exclusively on images of powerful women, mystical or otherwise either. As Graeber concluded, it's hard to avoid conclusion that these some kind of profound patriarchy bias here to play, as Coteto Apra contends. However, precisely because archaeological findings provide evidence, this discipline is held under strict patriarchal control, as can be seen in the way archaeologists who break with patriarchal ideology are treated. In spite of the first-rate cultural historical understanding possessed by Evans, in contrast to the later archaeologists, his interpretation of Ionic culture has been sidelined. At first, the search began for omnipotent king in Ionic culture, the big man, around whom the society must have revolved, but who is not to be found there. In decision-making, there's large buildings sometimes referred to scholarly literature as palaces. These buildings actually serve, according to Peter Gelderloos, as warehouses, retributive centers, collected housing for priestesses, and administration archives and religious sites. Gelderloos writes that the Cretans were in all probability a stateless people. Gret then had a written language, but the decoded documented language do not mention laws, rulers, or other elements of statecraft. In almost all states, one by the primary function of written language was to document laws and to chronicle the lives or careers of elites. By contrast, writings of the Cretans seem to focus mostly on trade and little on religion. In the economy had a mercantile economy with a large network of people that trade overseas that require food from multi-crop agriculture, apiculture, silviculture, aquaculture, fishing, and hunting. Some archaeologists suggest that the craftsmen and priestesses may have joined more of a palace luxury goods than the farmers and herders did. Still, Peter Gattulu does not think there was a class stratification since there was no police or other coercive mechanism to enforce people to work. In the worst case, merchant priests controlling the palace might have been able to impose an unfavorable exchange rate, making it difficult or impossible for the peasant to acquire luxury goods, but the peasants would still have been more or less self-sufficient, autonomous, and healthy. And they have no crimes because they have no police. It was a peaceful society with minimal of defensive infrastructure and no record involvement in offensive warfare. And you have, when people say Uruk period was the beginning of the centralized authority, some state that may be not the case. Some theories suggest that the ancient Sumerian city of Uruk, the earliest stage starting from 4000 BCE, had gender egalitarianism and participatory self-government. There are public assembly spaces that will have accommodated widespread participation from Uruk's estimated population, as celebration of the goddess Inanna may have signified a strong status of woman. Around 3200 BCE, Uruk established a state which is the first known state in human history. According to Attila Öcalan, the two sexes were still more or less equal in the earliest period of the Sumerian city. Noting a decline of woman goddess figurines, Öcalan hypothesized that shift from egalitarianism to patriarchy in Uruk coincided with the rise of the state. According to his words, the fact that the founder goddesses of Uruk is Inanna showed that she is far more ancient than the king Gilgamesh, and the role of the mother woman was still the leading one at the time. However, Uruk's struggle against Irudu, the city/god Enik, had perhaps the first pre-state, is legendary, an excellent example of gender struggle. Over time, less and less figurines of the woman goddess were made in a parallel with the onset of Babylonian period. The woman goddess had been destroyed. Woman now was an official public and private prostitute as well as a slave. David Graeber also hypothesized there was no major shift around 3200 BCE, evidenced by the destruction of assembly spaces and public buildings associated with the goddess Inanna. According to him, around 3200 BC, the original public buildings of the Inanna sanctuary were razed and covered with debris, and its sacred landscape redesigned around a city of gate courts and cigarettes. By 2500 BC, we have evidence for the local kings of rival city-state battling out for supremacy over Uruk, in response to which a 5.5-mile fortification wall, whose beauty was later attributed to Gilgamesh, went up around the city's perimeter within the few centuries. The city's rulers were setting themselves up as neighbors of the goddesses and the gods, building their own paladin houses on the doorsteps to the house of heaven, and stamping their names into a sacred brickwork. Even the anti-civilization theorist Freddy Perlman, in his book Against History, Against Leviathan, spoke something similar to Uruk, where he called the biblical name Erich. In his words, from standpoint of the Sumerians, nothing changed in the sense they never leave the state of nature. This is probably what accounts for the exotism that will continue to cling to what we will call early civilization. The Sumerians would become sect prisoners they still possess. The Sumerian women still give birth, not as machine, but the production of soldiers and workers, but as living beings in close contact with the source of being. Sumerian men, especially older ones, still seek contact with the spirit of the winds, the clouds, and even the sky itself. In fact, they devote themselves to their search more completely than they ever could. Now all their agency are devoted to the dances, festivals, and ceremonies. They no longer have to concern themselves in the trivia of material survival. The trivia are well done for them. Furthermore, the strong man and his men bring far more generous gifts to the spirit than could ever been given before. The strong man had built permanent shrines to all of the spirits and powers, incredible beautiful shrines, and around the shrine they placed gardens and filled them with all the creatures of the desert forest. Never before have the people shown such respect to beings responsible for life. It is true that the Luga builds the great shrine to his own deity. It is obviously presumptuous on the haunting Luga's part, since he cannot know that the spirit accept the hierarchy arrangement into which he placed them. This is a type of revolution, but the Sumerians are not not now going to turn against the Luga for his haughtiness. They got used to it, and instead of irking them, it now makes them smile with certain pride. It is thanks to him they can devote themselves to so completely to the well-being of their city. I have admitted to my question that the Sumerians were not part of a single one of the new agriculture implement. They do not long return to the timeless golden age. They are the golden age, more so now than ever before. It appears that the religion, while on one hand preserving much what was fulfilling about the forager life, also created the specialized role of priests and priestesses, which laid the groundwork for the rise of the state. Religious hierarchy will become the state hierarchy, and they speculate that but the golden Sumerians are no longer all of summer. In fact, some later scholarly accounts the golden Sumerians would not even existed. They will be dismissed with a single word. The word is temple, devotees of Inanna, the lovely daughter of the moon. The communications with Anu, the spirit of the sky, are not the users of the new implement. They are not the administration of the irrigation work, the builders of the great palaces, the heroes of the military encounters, the what we call priests and priestesses, oracles and diviners. All that is left in summer from the state of nature was shrunken to what we call religion. Although religious hierarchy highlighted the groundwork for the state rise, another crucial factor was probably climatic stress. From 3500 to 2500 BCE, increasingly arbitrary forces people to live in more concentrated areas and made irrigation more laborious. This geographic concentration made foraging less viable and made urban residents increasingly reliant on cereal grain, which is easily legible and taxable from above. James Scott writes, climate change stemmed by forcing a kind of urbanization which 90% of the population live in settlements of 30 acres or more, intensified the grain and manpower models that were ideal for the state formation. Like I said, before and during the Bronze Age, the earliest cities were anarchist cities. Like I said about the Çayönü, this is where the pigs were first domesticated and the first domestication of wheat. right? We also had the New Guinea Highlands, one of the few prehistoric anarchist societies that's still around. It's been around for 10,000 years, right? Then you also had the Minoan civilization, was the first European civilization which functioned as a matriarchy and anarchism, ended by a volcano eruption. And this volcano eruption, you can argue this is where the Atlantis story started. You also had the Janapadas in 1500 to 600 BC, was a series of republics and kingdoms of the Vedic India, where in some cases it was anarchist, while in other times it was monarchy, but yet never had borders. We also had the Jomo Society in Japan, was both a hunter-gatherer and had permanent towns. It was anarchist society with little to no violence. We also had the Dragacha in the post-classical period. It was an anarchist society without Aztec rule. We also had the Pueblo Revolt, which was the only successful indigenous revolution in history that kicked out the European settlers in 1680. It was an anarchist society until eventually one of those early revolutionaries wanted to become a king and ruin the whole society in general. We also had the Geno Society that was in Mali. We also had the what's it you call it, Nishanbeg, an anarchist society in pre-colonial North America. And like I said, the first earliest recorded documents of revolutions were anarchist revolution. We see, for example, the Old Kingdom in ancient Egypt from 2686 BC to 2055 BC, China in 2000 BC, and in Mesoamerica in 250 900 CE. These are the earliest examples of revolution, and they were all anarchist revolution. They want to go back to the old ways of life. Like we see in these early social and peasant revolts in the Old and Middle Kingdom and the classical period of Mesoamerica, which the priests and kings wanted to keep power by enforcing tradition over scientific inquiry, with very few scholars making early astronomy and medicine to keep the masses ignorant. That proto-science became scholasticism, then became magic and superstition, making a 1,000-year-long teleological stagnation. And when people had enough from the oppression and the few peasants who could read and write started the world's first revolution, what the center was the people wanted to return to their old societal structure, which was anarchist communism. And this is the struggle since the very beginning. And now, thanks to our technology, we met the material preconditions of the same anarchist society of our hunter-gatherer and median return societies have practiced for 95% of our history.